All right, so this is the nihilistic evolution that we believe. And we don't know that we believe this, but this is what we believe. Now, they claim that Sasalians, the simplest primitive animal, an amphibian, the simplest amphibian prior to or after a fish, lost its legs. The snake, just a head and a spine, lost its legs. The ichthyosaur, 250 million years ago, was already losing its legs. They hadn't had a chance to even start coming to the land yet. Just like the plesiosaur, this was hundreds of millions of years ago. The Timospondyle, these are amphibians, the giant amphibians of the ancient world. But we know that amphibians evolved toward reptile, and then reptile toward mammal, or at least that's what we're told. And then you have whales, they lose their legs. The sirenians, those are the manatee and the dugongs, they lose their legs. The seals, they were a terrestrial animal that lost its legs and went aquatic. Everything keeps losing. But if we trace cats and dogs and other animals back that have four legs, we can trace them back to a marine relative, like the elephants and the hyrax. They're actually related to sirenians. The artiodactyls, like the hippo, are related to whales. I mean, the food chain, you got to consider this. The whale and the whale shark are the two largest animals on Earth. That's a mammal and a fish. And they're both bottom feeders. But they'll have an adaptation where they'll evolve teeth. Then you'll have like great whites, megalodon, Odontoceti, sperm whale, Leviathan, the killer whales. And they live on algae. That's basically photosynthetic organisms. And plankton. They're bottom feeders. So it's from the ocean to semi, then to four legs. I mean, that's the only way it could have went, logically. I'm just saying, without complicating anything, we got to simplify this shit. Because it's not that hard. We all came from a tree of life and we're all related. But there's obvious physical morphology that is being swept under the rug. They're telling you contrary to what makes logical sense. So there's a pattern here that shows up. An obvious pattern. I've mentioned it many times. And just using skeletal morphology, osteological evolution. You have the whale, which is marine. Then it's sirenian, which is semi-terrestrial because it can come up and sunbathe. And they only live in like 30-foot water. So they don't live in the deep sea. Then you have the walrus, which is a pinniped. Now, technically, this guy is more related to us than an elephant seal would be. Because technically, we're related to Odobenidae. The elephant seals, which are related to him, which is the first cousin to him, that are earless, are related to the felines. And that's why we're 90% related to the cats. But another phylogenetic trait, boom, sea lions, they're related to dogs. And that's why we're 80% related to them. So, and then you have the artiodactyl coming onto the scene. So two lineages diverge from the fish, a giant fish anapsid. Ichthyosaur, amphibians. The amphibians remain anapsid until they evolve into diapsids, which are like birds and lizards. Note the turtle, he's still an anapsid like an amphibian, but he's actually a reptile. He's a stage in between. Scientists say that he lost something. They lose something. They're always, every animal, everyone's always losing something. Sounds like these people have lost their minds. It's a clear, obvious transition. They don't open their eyes to the animals we have right in front of us. They rely on a holy fossil record. And I mean that in tandem. A holy fossil record. So basically all of these animals that are egg layers, when this diverges, are venomous at some point. Because all of these animals that lay eggs are related to a venomous species. There are Paraguayan ducks that are actually venomous. So there are venomous birds. We know there are venomous lizards. And snakes are definitely venomous. Monotremes, they're venomous. And that's not deadly to us, but it inflicts a very, very painful wound. It means now that it's semi-mammalian, the venom is tapering off. Now people have a residual of these mammals, which are basically us. Archaeoceti, whales, artiodactyl, carnivorans. We have a bacteria in our mouth. And that's a residual trait that we'll inherit from millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. And basically from this lineage, because they're cousin lineage, they're sister lineage to the placental mammals. Now the turtle tells us something also, because it has this transition here. It means that its birthing mechanism, it's laying eggs, like leathery eggs, in nests or on land or burying them in sand or dirt, evolved before the skull did. So, and anapsids evolve into diapsids, which are reptilian, but the turtle is in between that stage because he's got an anapsid, which is like an amphibious skull, and it's like a fish's skull. So an anapsid doesn't have any hole here. A diapsid, di, has two holes, and a synapsid has one. So it goes from none to two to three synapsid, which is monotreme. like the platypi and the echidna. They're technically endothermic reptiles. They're not mammals. Now, I'm not saying it's not mammal-like, but it's technically a mammal-like reptile. Now, it has a mammary gland, but that's epigenome. Phylogenetically, it's not related to us. Now, here's some conflicting information. The ichthyosauromorphs were found to be diapsids, but they're also said to be urapsids, like plesiosaurs, but not mosasaurs. Now, no, these are all the largest animals on Earth because those are the titans. Got to start with the largest amount of energy because animals grew to their maximum size before they started tapering off, and ultimately dwarfism started coming onto the scene. But they'd been dwarfing prior to that too, which is weird because they say it lost its legs from terrestrial and went to the ocean too. I wanted to bet that they probably say the mosasaur does too. Holy shit, they do. Paleontologists only know a few things about the mosasaur evolution. That they were once land-dwelling lizards. That by 92 million years ago, a specimen called Dilophosaurus showed that mosasaurs had evolved into a obligate marine form. Who's to say that these giant amphibians, look how big they are, and animals are going to grow to their maximum size before they start tapering off when the islands become basically breaking up, the continents, island dwarfism. And amphibians can grow to large sizes anyway. And they have large genomes. So who's to say something like Prionosuchus, which is an amphibian that we know amphibians evolved toward reptile, couldn't have evolved into these giant mosasaurs over time, which are reptilian in the water, into animals like Sarcosuchus, which is a giant crocodilian. By coming to the shore, these flippers actually start adjusting to the ground. And all of these various amphibian sizes, they do the same thing. They all dwarf, and they come to the land. So this various population of amphibians evolve into a various population of reptiles. Fully marine, semi-aquatic, then fully terrestrial. I mean, look at Prionosuchus. It's a giant protogator, but it's an amphibian. And you're even going to have crocodiles that want to stand bipedally. Because every four-limbed animal eventually uses its hind limbs to stand up for something, and they'll evolve that trait. So eventually the tetrapods begin to become theropod. Now look at this. Mammals and amphibians share a common ancestor, which means they are more closely related to each other than they are to reptiles. So we're related to amphibians more than we are reptiles, but reptiles are closely more like evolved to us than amphibians are. Amphibians seem like they're a lot more primitive. You would think that a reptile would be closer to us than an amphibian. But that's not true because the fish evolved into amphibians, but it's a different lineage here with the ichthyosaur, which is a super amphibian, or it's a proto-mammal. But ultimately, this amphibian evolves into what is Archaeoceti, which is a synapsid, but it's got reptile-like traits, but it's a mammal. And then it evolves into modern Odontoceti, prefrontal cortex. And this is parallel evolution. This divergence here causes parallel evolution. And the further these animals evolve, the further apart they're divergent from each other. That means back here, that's when we're the split. That's why we're related so closely to amphibians rather than diapsids, which are reptiles and birds. Even though birds are warm-blooded and have a four-chambered heart. You can consider the amphibian as our first cousin, and then the birds are our second cousins, or the reptiles are our second cousins. So if the blood doesn't lie, then someone else is. And when it comes to the heart, fish have two chambers. And the amphibians have three. Reptiles have three. And then birds have four. And monotremes have four. We evolved ours early through the ichthyosaur species. I believe it was septated similar to a turtle's heart, as a matter of fact. But we'll never know until we find a heart that's actually fossilized, which is probably never. But the hypothesis stands with this pattern that is pretty evident. And by the time we evolve into synapsids, we're already warm-blooded. Now, if the ichthyosaur is a mammal, then all these traits that evolve in a mammal, like a whale, would be perfect with the 300 million year margin here. Testicle cooling, ball vertebra for vertical swimming, blubber, nursing adaptation, fetus and breach to avoid drowning, specialized lungs, front limbs into flippers, but it would be flipper to land, hip and muscles for reproduction, mod teeth, mod eye, mod skin, mandibular fat pad, skull bone recapitulation, skull bone reorganization, tracheoesophagus decoupling, ear bone mod, blowhole muscle nerves, isovaleric acid. Actually, the sperm whale lacks this. So the ichthyosaur is amphibious, and then the Archaeoceti, that's why they're reptilian-like, so it's a reptilian process, but it's already a mammal. Now it's just going through all the phases. It's like it's just going through all the motions. Amphibious, reptilian-like, mammalian. Amphibian, reptilian, mammalian. I mean, look, marine temnospondyls. Why couldn't that thing evolve into an ichthyosaur? Completely could. Even if the ichthyosaur was a reptile, it still makes perfect sense in an evolutionary sense, rather than what they say. These animals keep losing their legs. We already know the skull can change. So like Prionosuchus evolves into, Archaeoceti, like reptiles like the crocodilian order. Why couldn't this amphibian evolve into animals like mammals, whales, ichthyosaurs first, and then whales? By saying all these animals lost their legs, this is how they hide macroevolution. This is why nobody believes in macroevolution. Even people that should believe in macroevolution, like scientists, still question it because they keep telling everybody backwards. Now, the DNA says that we're related to an amphibian before we're related to the reptile. And the reason why the amphibian and the frog and the human animals share this right here, this characteristic right here, the sperm and, the egg, then the egg grows into a tadpole, which is basically an animal from the water onto the land. This transitional phase here, or a phase transition in physics, is the backbone or blueprint of all the animals' formation. In a macroevolutionary sense, this would be the planet, the first universal common ancestor, the Fuca, not the Luca, or organisms such as coral, sponge, sea squirts. Sea squirts are eventually going to evolve from eel into a fish. The fish are going to adapt limbs, evolve into amphibious animals, into reptilian animals, and ultimately into the apex animal, the mammal. I mean, look, if you can figure out the human reproductive cycle, which should be pretty apparent, then you can understand evolution. And you can figure out evolution. And it's that simple. It's literally as simple as that. Y and X. It's an intelligent design that shows up with the birth of the universe, throughout the time existence of the universe, and throughout the evolutionary life of all biological organisms. I mean, it's basically all Y and X. It starts with space, which is the X, the womb. I mentioned this before. And within that womb, you have the universe, which is fractal being inside of a womb. So you can imagine this is the fractal being inside of a womb. This is a Y, heel, H-E''L-L, heat wheel, yolk. Then you have the eggshell or the womb around it. Eggshell or shell, S-H-E''L-L, she wheel. So the universe is a he wheel, hell, sun, and a sun, light. It's all Y, nuclear force, which is like a strong force, nuclei. Then you have the electron shell around that, the womb around that, which is female, the eggshell around the male. And that's the weak force. So you have even the solar system, the sun. It's a Y factor. Then you have Earth, which is an X around it, Mother Earth, and our Father, the light, the sun. However you want to look at it. Regardless, philosophically and scientifically, they're facts. But Earth can also be a Y factor relative to the moon, which is an X factor orbiting it. So this can be XY, or it can be an X, but this is an X regardless. Plus, Earth has a nuclear core, which is its heart, basically, and then it has a photosphere, which is X. So there's a Y and X there. Even the core, of the sun. I'm not trying to make it beautiful. I'm just saying that even it has a Y. And then its photosphere is its shell, its X factor, which is funny because X factor and X-Men kind of go hand in hand. Just like SpaceX, the X box, the mother box. Even the galaxy has a nuclear core, and its spiral arms are its X. But here's where it gets inverted with the physics. Whereas all of these have a nuclear core, which is hot, this nuclear core is actually cold. It's inverted. This is going to be the source of a quasar, which is the last megastructure in the universe that emits. And the emission is important. A quasar is a very important physical aspect of the universe. But scientists don't technically explain the purpose of a quasar, or how that process doesn't just end with a quasar, because energy is re-emitted and energy is doing something, it's going somewhere, it's always there. So there's something there that's physical that they're not talking about. Now, at the core of that black hole is a singularity. It's a micro singularity. It's a small singularity. It's going to be the beginning, or this is the end phase that's going to be the beginning of a new universe when the whole universe goes through its heat death. And that's why it's inverted like this. It flips. Because cold, dark womb space, it's a hole. Space is a hole. So that cold black hole birthed the light. Just like at the end of this phase, this last phase transition, this hole at the core, which is a Y factor inverted, is going to give birth to a new singularity, but it's emitting it as a quasar, as dark radiation. And that dark radiation is going to become a new universe eventually. And every quasar, I've explained this before too, every quasar is going to have an intersecting line. And where those quasars intersect, there's going to be energy there. There's going to be a flux. And that's where a quasar node is. Now, there's no, I don't believe there's such thing as a quasar node, but you have to apply new physical concepts to concepts. If there's missing science, then we need to put something there. If there's a hole, we need to fill the hole, because there's a God of gaps in everything, especially evolution.